Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, back with another full build video. Today we are going to be building the Airfix 1/72 scale B25. Now my plan with this kit is to build it as a Marine Corps PBJ. And the reason I'm doing that is because on my Discord server I am hosting a US Marine Corps group build, and this is my entry into the group build. And I've always liked the Marine Corps and Navy PBJs, mainly just because I really like the blue paint jobs on the B25. I think it works really well. And so for this, I wanted to represent a really early version of the Marine Corps PBJ. So my thinking here is just it's going to kind of represent the aircraft as they would have appeared just arriving in theater in the Pacific. Once they were actually in the Pacific and fighting, the Marines made a lot of modifications to their B-25s. So this won't represent that. This is going to be really relatively early. The Airfix B-25 kit is, overall, it's a pretty decent kit. It does have some issues, and I'll point those out to you as we go throughout the build here. Additionally, I actually ended up making a lot of mistakes on this kit. And normally I try not to telegraph my mistakes very much, but I figured I shouldn't hide them, and because hopefully it can help other people to, maybe not make the mistakes I make. So there will be a few points throughout this build where I will point out some areas where I've clearly made some mistakes here. But jumping into the build, I did purchase the Edward color photo etch set for the cockpit. Well, pretty much for the whole front half of the aircraft here. So what I'm doing here is making a few modifications to the kit parts in order to receive the photo etch later on. So there are certain details that you will have to remove and trim down, file down, sand down, however you want to do that in order for the photo etch to fit on later on. The kit does offer a fairly decent representation of the interior out of the box. So with some careful painting, you can actually make it look pretty decent. But because there is a lot of kind of exposed internal area up front, I really just wanted to take it up to the next step here. So there are a number of electrical boxes or control boxes or whatever that you need to cut out of the photo etch and add into the model. The plastic that you get in the kit only represents about a third of what should be there. So it is nice to have the photo etch to kind of really help detail out the interior spaces. So these little boxes just require a couple of folds, and then they get glued onto the interior of the fuselage halves. You do have to really pay attention to where these parts get placed, because you don't want them interfering with the rest of the cockpit that gets fit into the fuselage. So you really need to pay attention to the Edward instructions, as well as you constantly need to be dry fitting the interior parts just to make sure you're not having any conflicts there. The whole cockpit and front area is actually really well designed, because it all kind of builds up as one unit that you fit into the fuselage. And in spite of the fact that you do have a lot of plastic going there, it all fits together rather well. And you can also use the fuselage halves to, as a jig. Like basically what I'm doing here is dry fitting the parts in just to make sure everything lines up, and so that it can dry in the correct position. So a combination of, constantly dry fitting and all that will help you to get everything lined up properly. And you do get the little passageway that you crawl through to get from the nose to the back of the airplane. That's all represented in here. And again, the way it all lines up and kind of connects together, it's quite nice. So here you can see I'm just getting some of these parts ready for painting. You do get a full bomb bay, which is, again, nice. Oftentimes, if you see images of B-25s on the ground, they usually have their bomb bay doors open. The one thing I don't necessarily love about this design is the fact that the bomb bay doors are essentially molded onto this interior part here. So if you want to do the bomb bay doors closed, you actually have to cut those parts out. You do get a separate set of doors for closed doors, but again, kind of annoying. But I guess that helps ensure, the bomb bay doors there's no way they're going to break off once you get it all put together, and they'll be properly aligned. But it is what it is. Here I'm gluing all the parts together for the upper turret. This is a fairly decent little kit unto itself, and as it should be, because the upper turret is quite large and there's not a lot of framing on it, so you do see a lot of this. So it's kind of nice that they give you this good representation, because you get the ammo belts, you get the ammo containers, the gunner's seat, the gunner's controls. Not too bad. Here I'm adding a little bit of Edward photo etch to the nose guns. So there's two guns in the nose. There's a fixed forward firing gun, and then there's a gun on a flex mount that the bombardier could use. So just getting a couple little parts on there. Again, there's a lot of clear parts up front, so definitely will be seen. With all the parts all ready, I can start priming them. I am using Alclad's gloss black base. This is kind of going off of my F84 build. I'm really learning to like this as a primer, and especially for areas that will be painted metal. But even just then, I find it's a good primer. It paints on well. It's really good at showing any imperfections or mistakes you may have, so you're able to find those and fix them rather quickly. So I'm liking it. So we're just going to go ahead and get everything primed up and prepped for painting. Now, you could do a lot of these cockpit parts separate, but I don't necessarily find that necessary. Now, one of the things that I did come across while doing research on the PBJs and B25s in general is that most of them were painted the bronze green as opposed to the more standard interior green. So just be aware, although I believe a lot of them had either interior green or zinc chromate in the aft portion of the fuselage, but the front part, all the crew areas in the front part were bronze green. And so that's what I'm doing there instead of using like an interior green. Additionally, the bomb bays on most B25s were kept in a natural metal color. So here I'm just hitting it with some Alclad aluminum. And again, having that gloss black base really helps that aluminum shine, and quite pleased with how this ends up looking. It did take a couple of coats to kind of fully build up that nice aluminum color that I wanted, but got there in the end. So here's just the interior, like the front, aft, and upper bulkheads for the bomb bay. Again, it is quite nice that you do get a relatively well-detailed bomb bay here. So if you wanted to display the bomb bay open without bombs, you'd be able to see all of that in there, and it looks pretty good. So now we can do a little bit of detail painting. So here we're just kind of picking out some of the cushions on the seats with a khaki color, and just going through and picking out some of the other details as well. I think this kit would be fun to do it in flight with crew, because again, a lot of the forward area of the aircraft is quite visible, even at this scale and with the semi-thick clear parts that Airfix provides. I think it'd be great to have like crew in there, pilot, co-pilot, and the bombardier. You'd really be able to see it. I think it would look neat. There's a little mistake there. I got a little too much paint on the where I shouldn't have, so I was able just to quickly clean it up with a moistened Q-tip. But one of the nice things about working with acrylics, if you act fast, you can get them cleaned up pretty quickly. More detail painting going around, just adding some aluminum to the ammo cans here for the upper turret. And I didn't go too super detailed on the turret, just because pretty much anything below the clear part you won't be able to see, but still, it's kind of fun to get your practice in. Now we can hit everything with a gloss coat. This will help protect everything that we've painted so far, as well as give us a good foundation for doing washes and any decals that you might have. The kit does come with an instrument panel decal. However, I found it very simple and basic, so using the photo etch set there will definitely help, and really help to liven things up. Now, I wanted to play around with different options for doing washes. So my normal wash would be, the Ammo MIG dark brown wash for green vehicles. But I've been and it's great, and it's worked for how I've wanted it to work for forever. But I've been wanting to move away from using an enamel wash just because I find that it's you have to have it over a protective clear coat, otherwise it eats up whatever paint's underneath it. And so I've been trying to test out different things that will help me, or that will allow me to do pin washes without using such a hard paint like an enamel. So here I'm actually using watercolor, and I've mixed the watercolor up obviously with water, and then with a little bit of dish soap. The dish soap helps break the surface tension and allows the wash to flow and go into recesses without necessarily like beating up and pooling up on flat surfaces. So here I'm just using like a dark brown sepia type color and giving everything a healthy dose or a healthy covering of the wash. I wasn't necessarily trying to be careful or like, accurately apply it, but once it dries, then you can remove it with a damp cloth here, or a damp paper towel, and wipe away the excess. It doesn't quite blend as nicely as like an enamel wash or an oil wash, but one of the things I do like about this is that there's almost zero chance of it harming the paint underneath. So with the wash done, I can now go ahead and get everything covered with a matte coat. So this will take away the shine and get us ready for adding our photo etch, as well as protect the wash that we just applied, because the wash, being that watercolor substance, it is somewhat fragile. So if you have a little bit of sweat on your fingers or whatever and you touch it, that could easily lift it off. So getting that matte coat on there will help seal that in so that you don't have any problems later. So now we can install the Eduard Photo Etch instrument panel. I am using a thick CA glue, super glue, to attach it. And here we add the second layer. I do like the multi-layer look of the instrument panels. It just helps kind of add a little bit of depth, especially when the kit part really didn't have anything whatsoever. It was just flat and you have to put a decal on there. So this definitely adds a lot more detail to the instrument panel and a little bit more realism. There are more photo etch parts that go on here for the control console. And again, it's just a matter of you get your super glue on there and then you attach the photo etch parts. And what's nice about a photo etch is if you're using a brand new blade like I'm doing here, you can actually kind of just gently push the tip of the blade onto the photo etch part, and that's usually enough to kind of grab it, pick it up, and then apply it on there, and it doesn't really damage the photo etch. So I just find it an easy way of applying photo etch parts, but quite happy with how it looks. Now we can do the seat belts on the seats. The Eduard only calls out for lap belts, and I've seen pictures of both just lap belts and shoulder harnesses on the seats. So, consult your references when doing that, but I think it works. Now I can start adding the photo etch to the side part. So we had put those boxes on before, the photo etch boxes on, but now they have like the pre-printed face plates to go on. And there was quite a few of them. So it's just kind of, again, just like applying the boxes earlier, it's just take your time, make sure you're constantly looking at your instructions so you're getting the right faceplate onto the right box. And just work your way through the list of things you have to do there. Again, I do feel like this helps add a lot of good detail to a somewhat visible area on the kit. And ultimately, I mean, you could get away with just, doing some detail painting here as opposed to the photo etch, and you'd probably still get the same effect with the canopy on, but I like the look of it. And I think it adds a lot of like color and contrast to the cockpit, but just that extra level of detail. So now that everything's on, we can start getting everything all put together in the cockpit. So we get the instrument panel going on, we've got the control column going on, and seats going in. I mean, other than my fat fingers, pretty much everything here fits pretty good and goes together well. I off camera, I didn't show this, but I did do a little bit of a dry brush over everything in here just to kind of hit some of those raised details and pick some of that out. So just be aware that I did do that, and I apologize for not filming it. So before we close up the fuselage halves, if you want to have the bombs in there, you have to get those done first. So here I've painted them up and just getting the decals on them and getting ready to get these installed. The bomb detail is fairly decent. I mean, as decent as you can get a bomb in 1/72nd scale, I guess. Because they're largely buried up inside the bomb bay, I wasn't terribly worried about how detailed they were going to look. Mainly just the fact that they were there. So attaching the bombs was kind of tricky. Like, there's a slot for it, but it's a pretty loose fit. So it took a little bit of time to get these in and at the correct angles, because you don't want the bombs interfering with the other side, because they are pretty much 1-for-1 across. So just be aware. That's a little tricky getting those installed correctly. But now we can get all the components I'll put in. I like the fact that it's got 2 wing spars, because it pretty much guarantees that you won't have any trouble getting the wings to fit on correctly. So, and it's pretty strong and robust, but getting this in there takes a little bit of time, but it does fit. So now, so I've built this kit before. I built it maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it's a tail sitter. So it requires a substantial amount of weight in the nose, and there's problem is there's not a lot of room in the nose for that weight. So you really kind of have to cram weight into every little nook and cranny that you can find. So here I'm just taking chunks of pewter, cutting them up and stuffing them into every little corner that I can. I did find out from an acquaintance of mine, obviously after this, that you can actually buy metal replacement parts for a lot of the cockpit parts. So like the cockpit floor and the bulkhead and all that stuff that's cast out of metal, and really helps with the nose weight issue. And you'll see this will come back to us later on. So now we can finally get the fuselage halves together, now that we've got all the cockpit parts all painted up and installed. And this is where, and this has happened on both times I've built this kit, I found the fit to be less than great. It felt like, even though I tried to make sure everything was aligned correctly and installed correctly, and that there wasn't anything overly like not fitting how it should be, I still found that I was getting gaps, especially along the upper side of the fuselage, that were more than, that were fairly substantial. And so that's kind of frustrating, just because you have to deal with a lot of sanding. So you can see here I've done my first passes of sanding and filling, and you can see there's quite a lot of filler on there. And eventually I'll actually have to do a second pass. Once I actually get primer on the aircraft, I end up doing a second pass just to fill in ghost seams and areas that I missed. So it does take a fair amount of filler and sanding to get the fuselage halves together correctly. And that's unfortunate, because there's a fair amount of detail too that you end up getting rid of because it doesn't fit great. So now we can just add in some of these inserts. So we have the blanking plate for the lower turret. So some of the early B-25, the C's and D's, actually had a retractable lower turret, but they quickly found that they were not very effective and were deleted. So the opening was just blanked over. That's why it looks the way it does. You also have the option of having both the front and rear hatch open. I opted to have them closed on this build. Here I'm just building up the elevators and the horizontal stabilizers. So Airfix does provide you with separate elevators, separate rudders, and separate flaps for the kit. So definitely nice for options. I do like the way they handle the side windows here, where they have the large clear insert that follows panel lines, as opposed to trying to put in tiny individual windows. And even though it's just on these two little panels here, it's nice, and it saves you some time. Now we can get the main canopy installed on. Again, I like that it actually has that part of the fuselage in front of the canopy as part of the part. I think it just helps it fit better. So installing the horizontal stabilizer, again, fit here was not great. I ended up having to do a lot of sanding and filling to get that all blended in. And I mean, you can see there's a decent gap there between the horizontal stabilizer and the fuselage. So it's unfortunate that the kit has as many fit issues as it does, because the detail is fairly nice, and the options you get with the kit are really nice. So, make of it what you will. Just be aware that you will have those issues. So here I'm installing that flex mount gun in the nose. Just tiniest amount of the Tamiya cement there to get that fixed in. And now I've slotted the fixed firing gun into the canopy front there, and I'll glue that onto the floor of the aircraft. But I have the canopy there just to help make sure that it stays aligned correctly, so that it points out the front of the aircraft, straight. This part of the canopy doesn't fit great and leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of its width. It feels just almost like a millimeter too narrow. But moving on, we can add some canopy masking here. So it is, on a kit like this, I find it's essential to get pre-cut canopy masks. It just takes so long to do all this by hand. And having a preset or a pre-cut mask really helps speed this process up. I am using an Edward pre-cut mask set here, and I found it overall was pretty good. But I would also be remiss if I didn't do a shout out to kitmask.com, because they make great painting masks, clear canopy masks, markings masks as well. So check them out, kitmask.com. Look up their website. Again, the B25 has a lot of glass, a lot of parts to mask off, and this would just be such a pain if I didn't have a nice mask set to speed up this process. So it's just a matter of, just one piece at a time, following your instructions. Fortunately, they have it laid out pretty, in a pretty logical way on the actual sheet, so that it's pretty obvious which parts go where on the aircraft. But because there are so many, it takes time. Although I think in the end, it probably took me about 20 minutes to get all the masking on. And I think if I was doing this by hand, it would have taken me hours of cutting and cursing and getting frustrated. So it definitely is a huge, nice benefit. Here I've got the landing lights painted up. So these parts go, actually fit into the wing. So you have to install these before you close the wing halves together. But they are quite nice because the B25 does have large landing lights, and they are quite visible on the finished model. So painting them correctly will help you out a long ways. And basically what I did is, on the back side of the clear part, I painted the actual lens silver and then painted black around it. And I think that helps sell the effect. So now we can get the wings all put together. Fit on the wings was actually really good. I didn't really have any issues there. The landing light cover can go on. I do like that this is a full, large clear part, and then you can just mask off the actual lens part. Engines go in together. You get a full set of a full front set of pistons, and then half of a back set, but that's plenty for this scale. I have added the ignition wires, and I do have a video on how to add ignition wires to engines. I'll link that down below. Now I need to drill out the exhaust. So the B25s, after I believe the early C's, they went to short stack exhaust. So the exhaust was coming directly off the cylinder head, and then basically making a quick bend and then out the cowling. So every cylinder had its own little exhaust stub. Earlier B25s, all the exhaust was collected and exited out one single exhaust port on the side of the nacelle. And it is kind of a pain, especially at such a small scale, to do this, but it really adds a great amount of detail to drill out all of your exhaust. So basically what I'm doing here is I used a small drill bit to drill this hole, and then I'm using the knife to kind of carve out a larger opening that's a little bit more squared off to, in shape with how those look. And then now we can add the first row of the exhaust on as well. So these just get installed on. And don't worry, I will trim the little locating bits at the end of those after they get glued on, or after the glue hardens and they're secure on there. But I do clean those up, I promise. These ones are already somewhat drilled out, so you don't have to do as much work with these ones. But because these ones are drilled out on the kit, it makes sense to drill out the back ones so that they're consistent and look the same. So now we can paint the interiors of the wheel wells. We need to do this in order to move on with the construction of the aircraft. So again, as far as I could tell, these were painted bronze green. I could be wrong, but that's what I came up with, as well as the interiors of the engine cowls. And then we can do the internal framing of the clear parts as well with that same bronze green color. By doing this first, it just helps, as once you remove all the masking, it will show the bronze green showing through on the inside, whereas the exterior color will be on the outside. One unfortunate thing, and this is pretty common with pretty much all B-25 models, is you have to install the main landing gear before you can close up the nacelles. It's annoying, it's not a huge roadblock, but it just does mean that you have to mask off and protect your landing gear while you're going through the rest of the painting process. Here we're just throwing on some paint onto the gear reduction housing on the engines, and doing a little bit of detail painting here, painting up the ignition wires. The B-25 has pretty closely cowled engines, so you don't see a lot of the detail, but it will be visible, so taking a little bit of time to do a little bit of detail painting can go a long way. Just don't stress over getting it perfect, because most of this gets covered up. But now we can actually glue up and install our engine nacelles. There was a fair amount of sanding that was required on these as well to get these to fit, or at least to get these blended together. The actual fit to the wing is not terrible, and they do follow along natural panel lines, so you don't necessarily have to do a ton of sanding with that. But there is room in there to add more weight. So obviously that's what I'm doing here, is just adding more weight into the fronts of the engine nacelles. You want to try and add as much weight ahead of the main landing gear as possible to get this to not be a tail sitter. So I'm just super gluing this all in there, and did this on both sides. And then finally we can put the firewall piece on. And now we can move on to painting the aircraft. So the actual wing to fuselage fit is really nice, and they just fit right on. But here's kind of where I made one of my first big mistakes, is gluing the wings on prior to painting. Because the fit is so nice, in hindsight, I should have left the wings off and painted them separately. It would have made masking and painting so much easier. But I didn't do that. So here we are going ahead and giving everything a good coat of primer. And you can kind of see a couple little ghost seams on the top there. I do have to eventually get those taken care of. But now we can start hitting the main colors. So we're just using a light gray from Ammo MiG on the underside surface. I didn't do any pre-shading with this. The B-25s that were delivered to the Marines were all fairly new, and they were kept in good condition during training, so they would have arrived to the Pacific in pretty good condition. So I wasn't going to worry too much about doing super heavy weathering and fading and all that stuff. So we're just doing the paint straight onto the primer here, doing a nice good solid coat, and making sure we get that everywhere. And then now I've gone ahead and using blue tack to mask off the underside. I'm going ahead with the blue color. So this is a color called Gray Blue by Ammo MiG. And just right now I'm being really careful trying to paint along the demarcation line, but you can see how just annoying and tricky it would have been to get in and around the nacelles and the fuselage by the bomb bay with the bomb bay doors open. It just would have been so much easier if I had left the wings off. So that's the big tip here, is leave the wings off for painting, especially if you're doing a somewhat, or pretty much with all of the paint options you get with this kit. You will need to do substantial masking, so I highly recommend that. The blue did take a few coats to get a nice good solid coverage on there, but I got there eventually. Now I've just added a little bit of white to the gray blue, and I'm doing a little bit of like lightening on the control surfaces just because they were fabric covered. So we're hitting up the rudders and then the elevators, the elevators and the rudders with a slightly lightened color of the original base color. And then I do eventually go on and highlight a few panels with the lightened color as well, just to add a little bit of subtle variation to the upper side surface, just because even though these aircraft would have been new and in good condition, it still wouldn't have precluded them from getting wear and tear. Decals for this build are pretty straightforward. I used the national insignias from the kit, and then the rest of the decals came from my spares. Fortunately, the Marine Corps PBJs, they weren't too fond on, going with tons and tons of markings. So it overall is relatively simple here. I find that the Airfix decals are generally pretty good. I really don't have problems with the Airfix decals, and they react well to my Salva set. So happy with those. And then as far as the spares, the decals that I used for my spares, they came from mostly unidentified manufacturers because I couldn't even remember where the original decals came from, but I didn't have any problem with any of them either. So overall, really happy. The serial number on the aircraft will not be accurate. Again, it's something I got from the spares, but I needed black serial number, so it will look the part. Here's the Salva set. So this is a decal setting solution. You apply it over the decal, and it helps it to conform down into any details, panel lines, rivets, that type of thing. So you apply a general, healthy amount, and then let it sit overnight and do its thing. So these only required one application, and they snuggled right in, and was very happy with them. Here's a big mistake number 2 is I should have masked off and painted the de-icing boots before doing the decals. And because I've kind of gotten burned on trying to carefully mask over decals on recent builds, I didn't even want to attempt to do it. So I opted to hand paint it. Now, they didn't turn out the best, but I think it's less of a headache than if I had tried to mask these off and spray them. And again, another reason why you should leave the wings off while painting, it would make painting the de-icing boots so much easier. But with that done, I can now move on to gloss coating the entire aircraft in preparation for weathering. So again, we're using our Alclad Aqua Gloss here. And I do thin the Aqua Gloss with a little bit of X20A thinner by Tamiya. And this just helps it spray on nice and even and level out while it is curing. So now we can move on to weathering. And this is my first time using Flory Models clay-based wash. So again, another experiment because I mentioned I didn't want to keep using enamel washes. And I'd heard good things about the Flory washes. And so I think I can say I was pretty pleased with how they turned out and how easy they were to use. And they're definitely much more, durable than the water paint wash that I made for the interior. So they do wipe off with a moistened towel. It requires a little bit more effort to remove it than the watercolor wash that I made. So definitely more durable. It's not going to just rub off just from touching it with your hands. It requires a little bit of oomph to get that off, and as well as moisture. So pretty pleased with it. Now we can hit everything with we can hit everything with a matte coat. This will seal in all of our wash and all of our decals and prep us for the oil painting. I have heard people complain that they find the Vallejo washes difficult to use. And I find that if you thin the Vallejo matte coat with like 30% X20 thinner, it goes on really nicely. So That's where I find success. Removing the masking on the canopy revealed some problems. There was a lot of sanding dust inside the canopy. And at first I was super bummed and really disappointed that it happened. But because of the way the canopy is designed, it's actually not, depending on how well you glued it in, it's not terribly difficult to pop the canopy free and get in there to clean things up. So this is definitely a mistake on my part. Somewhere along the line, I either didn't clean out the sanding dust, or there was a crack that got open that it was able to move around in. Regardless, this is a mistake I was able to rectify carefully, because you don't want to break the clear parts here, but I was able to get in and clean out pretty much all of the sanding dust and get these canopies back up to a nice clarity. So you just have to be careful when gluing them back on, that you don't, because you are gluing onto painted area, you don't want to ruin the painted surface. I did have a few areas where the masking pulled up some paint, as well as just my handling of it. So here I'm going back over just with a brush and the base coat to touch up a lot of the areas where the paint got damaged. So it happens. I mean, it is what it is, right? I was fortunate in this case that I was able to remove the canopy, clean it up without too much fuss, and I was able to recover from this. I've had other projects where I've gotten sanding dust on the inside of something that I knew there was no way I was going to be able to get to it, and that's just like a big gut punch, the feeling that we're like, you've gone through all this hard work and it's just ruined because of a little bit of dust inside your clear parts. And because you can't unsee it, you just can't not see big specks of dust on the inside. So I am glad that I was able to recover from this one and get this all touched up. So now we can start doing a little bit of the kind of the more detailed assembly parts here. Landing gear goes on, and unfortunately I didn't add in enough nose weight. It still was a tail sitter. That was another gut punch. It was like, after all that effort I went into filling every nook and cranny with weight, it still wouldn't sit on its landing gear. And so I decided to move on to weathering while I decided how I wanted to deal with the tail sitter. If you've seen a lot of my other videos where I do weathering, this is not going to be unfamiliar to you. Essentially, I wet a certain area of the model with mineral spirits, and then I start adding oil paint here and then blending it in with this wide brush here. I saw some really interesting reference pictures of PBJs where the only place that it was dirty was in this section between the engine and the sails, up and over the fuselage, where the ground crew would have been working, because those are the areas where they fill up the fuel tanks. So the ground crew would have been walking up there, servicing that stuff. And so it was just really interesting to see how just this very specific section of the aircraft was dirty, and it wasn't really dirty anywhere else. And so I really wanted to play around with replicating that. So I'm using a black color here to start off with, and you can do multiple layers to build up that effect. And now I'm going to come in with a brown color, a dark brown color, just to add a little bit of dirt to the mix. And then again, so you can kind of slowly build this up in layers until you get the level and the saturation that you are looking for. So this isn't going to be nearly as heavy as some of the other models I've done, or I have coming down in the pipeline on future videos, but it was just kind of fun, and it helped kind of break up the overall monotony of the blue color on the fuselage. And just kind of helps you to get an idea of, where would the ground crew be actively working around the aircraft. And so it makes sense that they would be in this area because, that's where the engines are, that's where the fuel tanks are. They wouldn't necessarily need to be walking on the outer panels of the wings. There's just nothing out there necessarily for them to service. Now we can do the exhaust. And because this does have individual exhaust and exhaust stacks, you do get a really interesting exhaust pattern. So again, I'm using oil paint here, black oil paint, put a little dab on, and I'm using this dry brush to kind of stipple and blend it into the paint job and feather it out. And gives this great, because the exhaust stubs run all around the outside of, the outer diameter of the engine. It's fun to kind of give it that effect where you just get all these individual streaks of exhaust as opposed to like one large area of exhaust. I just think it helps add a really cool, unique look to the aircraft. And so now we can add on some of our final details here, but we are going to hold off because I did figure out that in order to get this to not be a tail sitter, I would have to attach it to something. And so I figured, well, we need to make a small diorama base. And I guess, so the idea that I came up with was like, okay, the aircraft had just landed in its first area in the Pacific. And, and so that's kind of what I was going to go for here. So I've got a little piece of wood here. I've got some Mod Podge that I'm putting onto it. This is basically just fancy PVA glue. And then we're going to add some dirt. This is just dirt from my backyard that I've sifted and so that it's nice and fine. Add this on and get a good coverage here. So I'm going to kind of go for like a sandy, South Pacific look here. And so once the glue dried, I primed it black, and now I'm hitting it with this sand ivory color from Vallejo. Just getting a good, nice overall coverage here. I think in hindsight, if I were to do it again, I would prime it in a brown color instead of black. I think the black kind of desaturated the sand color a little bit, but that's a nitpick on my part here. So now we're going to add a little bit more of the Mod Podge so that we can add some of our static grass. So I'm just applying this with a brush, and I recommend using an old brush for this because you don't want to use a new brush because it will eventually gunk up the brush. But now we can apply our static grass. So this is a this is Army Painter static grass, kind of their battlefield green color. So it's actually a mix of different colors, which helps add a little bit of variety, but just basically wanted a nice bright green color here to represent some of that, thick, heavy tropical grass. You can knock off the excess back into the container, and pretty simple. It's a simple base, but I think it's effective. Just going back over the edges and hitting them with some black. I am not using model paint for this. I'm using craft paint. Just find it better to use craft paint for this kind of stuff as opposed to my expensive model paint. So, and it helps, just kind of creates a nice border for the aircraft, and now I can get the aircraft glued down. So for this, I'm actually using a 5-minute epoxy to get that glued on, so onto all 3 landing gear. And then once the actual aircraft was glued down, there were a few final details that I wanted to add to it that I didn't want to add while I was still handling the aircraft. So here we're just adding a little bit of fuel stains to the upper side surface, and with that Vallejo product. It looks pretty good, I think, in my opinion. And then finally we can add the radio antennas here. So this is Easy Line. It's a flexible nylon, like a stretchy nylon line. I am securing it with thick CA glue, and it's just kind of, this is one of those things where it's not terribly difficult. You just have to be really patient and not rush. But once you get it, then it works great here. So just extending, so we have 2 lines that come from each rudder onto the front mast, and then there's a line that goes from the front mast to the rearward mast. And again, so these are just secured with CA glue, and it doesn't really take long for it to set up once you get it on there nice and tight. And then we can trim the excess, and definitely looks the part. And I love adding aerial rigging. But I also felt that we needed some figures. Now, I've said it before, I struggle with filming my figure painting, and I had actually painted these for another project, which is why you have the white background as opposed to the blue background, but ended up using them for the B20 or for the PBJ. So, but I hope you can learn something from this. I am using Vallejo paints here. I apologize, I'm not calling out each individual color. But all my brush painting I do with Vallejo paints here. And so I did a dry brush over the entire figure. And the reason I did that is because it helps me to better see the small details, because it'll highlight and pick up little edges and little details that kind of get washed out when you have a solid primer color on there. So this just helps me to better determine where I need to put paint. I know there are some people that will do this type of thing and then do like a thin wash overwards, so that a little bit of that dry brushing shows through. I wasn't necessarily concerned with doing that on this. Here I'm painting up the Life Vest with an ochre color. I eventually will go over it with a more of a yellow color, but I find the ochre color is a good base for yellow, as opposed to like a brown or a black or something like that. It just helps make painting the yellow much easier later on. So now I can paint all the straps and stuff with this, I don't even remember what color. I think it was just like a grayish tan color, like a field gray color. And so we can go over all of our straps. These figures, by the way, were designed and sculpted by my good friend Mike Evans. His company is called Stonehaven Miniatures, and he sculpted up these figures on his computer, and then I printed them out on my 3D printer. And if you are a member of my Patreon, you can get access to these figures. So we have the pilot figure, and then we have this guy here. He's the cameraman. So my idea here was the airplane had just arrived in the South Pacific, and to commemorate the event, the pilot is getting his picture taken in front of his aircraft. So right now I'm just painting up the fleece-lined part of his jacket, his bomber jacket there, with like an off-white color. And now I'm going to go over the entire figure with a wash. This is the Agrax Earthshade wash from Citadel. Great wash for doing figure painting because it really helps make little details pop and adds like contrast to otherwise flat areas, solid color areas. So the whole figure gets covered top to, head to toe. And now I'm going to hit that life jacket with more of a yellow color. So I do this after the wash just because I didn't want the wash to like dull down that yellow, the bright yellow of the life jacket. And because yellow is a traditionally hard color to paint with, it did take a couple of coats to get the yellow to a nice solid color. And then now I'm picking out the glass on his goggles. It's a little bit of a stylistic choice, definitely. Like I could have just gone with like black and called it good, but I kind of wanted a little bit of pop of color in there. So hitting the goggles with some blue and then blending in different shades of light blue and white to kind of build up a little bit of a gradient in there. Nothing fancy, but I like the look of it. And then once that's all done, we hit everything with a matte coat. So this will knock away the shine from the wash, as well as protect all of our paintwork. And hopefully you can learn something from this. Again, I struggle with recording figure painting, but I figured I owe it to you guys to give it a try. So now we can super glue our figures down onto our base, and that's going to wrap it up for us. So here we have the final reveal of our U.S. Marine Corps PBJ. And so this Airfix kit is not perfect, but if you want to build an early style B-25, it's really the only option in 1/72 scale. So you kind of have to learn to love it. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, just not great. It definitely falls into their range of like mediocre kits. But overall, the shape of it and the details are pretty accurate. And I think if you're willing to put in the work, it looks pretty good in my opinion. Again, this was part of a group build that I was hosting on my Discord channel. If you are interested, let me know if you're interested in the Discord. I will be doing future group builds as well. So, and I'll also have a video coming out later on showcasing all of the other group build participants. So you can look forward to that. I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons for helping to support this channel and make it easier for me to bring this kind of content to you. Additionally, if you like what you've seen here and you're not subscribed yet, I would hope you would consider subscribing. I try to post videos every week, alternating between build videos and review videos. So like the video, leave me a comment down below what you think, and we will see you all on the next video. Cheers, everyone.